Tonight's mystery plunges you into Manhattan's dog show elite, where a terrified Doberman lands on a reclusive gourmet detective's desk and drags murder in on its heels. Settle in, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight, and subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Doberman on Wolfe's desk. The first thing I saw when I stepped into Wolfe's office at 8:12 that morning wasn't Wolfe, wasn't Fritz with a tray, and wasn't even the usual sight of my own typewriter glowering at me like a neglected mistress. No, perched right on Wolfe's prized mahogany fortress of a desk was a Doberman that looked as if it had personally foreclosed the brownstone and was waiting for me to vacate the premises. Its ears were rigid, its chest trembled, and its eyes tracked me with the sharp appraisal of a creature deciding whether I was a chew toy or a footman. "Easy," I murmured, raising both hands like a peace delegation. "I'm only here to work, but you can take my chair if you insist. Everyone else does." The Doberman didn't blink. It simply shifted one paw farther onto Wolfe's blotter, which I mentally marked as Exhibit A in the coming household riot. The blotter wasn't sacred, but it came close. Wolfe had once threatened to fire me for putting a stack of case notes on it that weren't perfectly aligned. The dog wore a silver collar engraved with one of those fancy club emblems you see on the lapels of men who don't know what to do with their hands at charity dinners. The tag read, "Property of the Canine Dominion Club." I didn't know much about the club, but the name made it sound like a place where dogs lived better than humans, which in Manhattan was a reasonable wager. I approached slowly. "If you don't mind," I told the dog, "I'd like to avoid explaining teeth marks to Wolfe before breakfast. He takes personal offense at anything that disrupts his digestion, including my existence." The dog didn't lunge, so I took that as consent and moved to inspect. Its muscles were taut beneath a glossy coat, the kind that cost more in grooming products than I spent on suits. But there was something else, a faint tremor, a quiver that wasn't fear so much as exhaustion. And beneath one paw on the blotter, barely visible, was a dark red smear. A scrap of velvet peeked out from under its chest. Blood, dried but unmistakable. "Wonderful," I muttered. "A messenger dog with a flair for drama." I reached for the scrap, slowly, because even I'm not fool enough to test a Doberman before coffee. The dog allowed it, opening its jaw just enough to let me tug. The velvet was torn from a larger ribbon, dark blue or maybe black depending on the light. Expensive fabric too, the kind used in rich hobbies and poor decisions. Before I could pocket the thing for closer examination, a sharp rap hit the front door, followed instantly by a voice pitched at the frequency of panic. "Mr. Wolfe, please, someone must help me." I swore under my breath. It was 8:14. Wolfe's orchid hours would begin at 9, and there were rules. Rules that didn't include hysterical women charging through the house. Wolfe hated before breakfast visitors more than he hated unripe peaches, and that was saying something. But the voice was already inside the front room, and Fritz, bless his stainless steel soul, appeared in the office doorway with a face full of consternation. He never answered the door, but he had apparently been setting the breakfast table nearby and heard the commotion. "Archie," he said, "this lady—" He didn't finish. The lady finished it for him by sweeping past with the force of a gale. She was youngish, somewhere between 25 and 30, with a wealth of red hair pinned in hurried fashion and eyes large enough to crowd out the rest of her expression. Her coat, sable, or an excellent imitation, hung open, revealing a pearl-grey dress that had clearly been elegant before being battered by worry. She froze when she saw the Doberman. "Oh, Baron," she breathed. "Thank God." Baron, upon hearing his name, let out a soft whine. It was the first sign of vulnerability I'd seen in the beast. The woman clasped her hands against her chest. "Mr. Goodwin? Are you Mr. Goodwin? I was told—" "Well, I don't even know what time it is. It's too early for unannounced visits," I said, "and far too early for melodrama. But yes, I'm Goodwin. And you are?" "Virginia Galt," she swallowed. "I'm here because my brother is missing. And that dog is the last thing he owned that made it home." I gestured toward the red velvet scrap. "You're sure this is his dog?" "Baron belongs to my brother's club, the Dominion Club, the elite dog breeders." She moved forward and touched the Doberman's head, cautious, reverent. Lawrence would never let anything happen to him. Never. That tremor under the dog's coat made more sense now. Stress. Long running, maybe, Something chasing it or someone sending it somewhere it didn't want to go. I offered her the scrap. This was lodged under him. Yours? Her face paled. No, but Lawrence had a velvet case he kept his championship ribbons in. Deep blue. It looks like that. Interesting. The velvet was torn, not cut. A struggle? Virginia pulled in a shaky breath. Please, I need Mr. Wolfe. I was told he's the only one who can help. I winced. You've arrived at precisely the wrong hour for the only one who can help. Wolfe is... I didn't finish because the elevator began its slow descent, humming like a low warning. Wolfe never hurried, not for kings or killers, so the timing wasn't miraculous. It was simply that his orchid session was still 45 minutes off, and curiosity had pried him from upstairs. He emerged wearing his yellow pajamas and an expression that suggested the world had recently insulted him and he was ready to retaliate. His eyes moved from me to Virginia to the Doberman perched on his desk like a surreal paperweight. What, he said, is that? Good morning to you too, I said. This is Baron. He arrived before the mail and is better behaved than most of it. The dog let out a single bark. Wolfe flinched, a small motion but a rare one. Virginia stepped forward. Mr. Wolfe, my brother Lawrence is missing. Baron came to me with that. She pointed to the velvet scrap. At dawn. I fear something terrible has happened. Wolfe stared at her, then at the dog. Remove the animal from my desk. Believe me, I said, I've tried diplomatically. He prefers premium seating. Virginia flushed. I'm so sorry. Baron would never... Wolfe lifted a hand. The gesture alone silenced her. Miss Galt, I do not investigate lost pets. It isn't Baron who's lost, she whispered. It's Lawrence. I saw Wolfe's jaw tighten. Missing persons before breakfast was last on the list of things he liked, somewhere below physical exercise and above political conversations. And the dog, Wolfe said, is evidence. She nodded weakly. Wolfe approached with careful, disdainful steps, studying the Doberman with the scrutiny of a lexicographer reviewing a dictionary printed in an incorrect alphabet. He is distressed, Wolfe observed, and exhausted. He has travelled far. Yes, I said, I noticed. He's got better cardio than we do. Wolfe shot me a glare. Confound your levity, I grinned. Confounding completed. He examined the velvet scrap without touching it directly. This, he said, is either a message or a memento. Neither pleases me. Virginia clutched her coat. Mr. Wolfe, I'll pay anything. Lawrence didn't just vanish. He was treasurer of the Dominion Club, and they've had disputes, money disputes, rivalries. Ah, there it was, the motif, pedigree politics. I could practically hear the cash register ring in Wolfe's mind. Very well, Wolfe said. I will accept a retainer. I guided her to a chair, the one that didn't squeak, and she produced a checkbook with trembling hands. When she wrote the number, even I raised an eyebrow. Wolfe accepted the check with a nod that was almost approving. Now then, he said, tell us everything. She did, quickly, breathlessly. Lawrence had attended a late meeting at the Dominion Club last night. He never returned. At dawn, Baron appeared at her apartment door alone, carrying the velvet scrap in his teeth. There was blood, she whispered, on his fur. I wiped some away, but... Wolfe stiffened. Archie, you will take the animal to the kitchen and give him water, then return. The kitchen? I stared. Fritz will have my head mounted over the stove. Fritz will cope, Wolfe said. The dog needs water. There it was. The protectiveness he never admitted. Wolfe wouldn't risk me doing anything hazardous, but he trusted me to handle a nervous Doberman rather than Virginia or himself. I coaxed Baron off the desk, earning only minimal resistance, and escorted him toward Fritz's domain. Fritz accepted the intrusion with dignity and a bowl of clean water, though I'm certain he silently cursed us all. When I returned, Wolfe was settling into his chair like a monarch ready to pass judgment. Virginia was twisting her gloves into shapes not approved by any fashion designer. Miss Galt, Wolfe said, you may sit. Archie, your report. Dog hydrated. Fritz injured only spiritually. Wolfe's lips twitched, his equivalent of a belly laugh. Before the conversation could resume, the phone rang, sharp, insistent. I crossed the room and answered. Goodwin, I said. Goodwin, growled Inspector Kramer's unmistakable voice. Put Wolfe on. He's occupied, I said, with a dog and a damsel. Well, he can add a corpse to the list, Kramer's voice lowered. There's been a murder in the Dominion Club kennels, and the stiff might be Lawrence Galt. I felt the room tilt just a degree. You sure? Not yet, but Wolfe will want to hear this, and I want him to stay put until I get more details. Staying put is his best skill. Just tell him, Kramer said, and hung up. I turned. Wolfe, we've got a problem. He arched a brow. Another one? Kramer says there's been a homicide at the Dominion Club kennels. Victim might be Lawrence Galt. Virginia gasped, her knees buckling. I caught her before she fell. Wolfe closed his eyes once, slowly, and as if humanity itself were an inconvenience. Then he opened them with steel behind the calm. Archie, he said, prepare to work. And just like that, the dog on the desk became the least peculiar thing about our morning. The Dominion Club didn't look like the sort of place where people bred dogs. It looked like the sort of place where kings were manufactured, and lesser beings paid admission to admire them. That was my thought as I stepped out of the cab at 9:48 and stared up at a limestone facade that would have made a museum blush. Tall columns, bronze doors polished to a moral shine, and a row of flags flapping overhead like pedigree certificates waving in the breeze. If you wanted to impress someone with your canine superiority, this was the place to do it. Inside, the lobby had marble floors so clean I hesitated to walk on them for fear of leaving human footprints. A chandelier sparkled above enough trophies to summon the envy of every child athlete in America. The staff wore spotless white uniforms, starched and pressed, the kind butlers wore in movies about people who never perspired. I signed the guest register, politely ignoring a stuffed mastiff head mounted over the desk, and followed a clerk who whispered, "The inspector is waiting downstairs, sir," as if we were heading into a crypt instead of a kennel. Kramer was waiting. He stood outside the kennel wing with his arms folded, a cigar stub planted between his teeth like he'd bitten down to stop himself from cursing. He gave me a look that suggested he'd already regretted calling Wolfe, and me by extension. "Morning, Inspector," I said. He grunted. "Goodwin." I stepped closer. "You sound cheerful. Something good happen? Win a raffle?" He removed the cigar long enough to snort. "Wolfe sent you, didn't he? I said I'd call when we had identification." "Right, but he's anxious. He can't pace, so I have to do it for him." Kramer rolled his eyes, but it wasn't hostile. "Don't step on anything," he warned, "and don't touch anything, and don't talk to anyone unless I'm there. And for God's sake," I finished it for him, "don't drag Wolfe into my report. I know." He stepped aside and signaled me in. "Just be quick." We entered a long, tiled hallway. The air smelled of disinfectant, sawdust, and expensive fur. Rows of immaculate kennels lined the corridor, most empty, a few occupied by dogs that looked like they came with their own stock portfolios. A pair of handlers stood against the wall, pale and shaken. We turned left into an open grooming bay, and there he was. Lawrence Galt lay sprawled on the floor beside a small safe mounted in the wall. The safe door hung open, its contents, pedigree records, certificates, genetic logs, scattered like confetti after a riot. Galt's body was twisted at an angle no man chooses voluntarily. One hand lay against his chest, fingers curled around a strip of velvet ribbon that matched the scrap Baron had delivered to his sister. I stopped a few paces back. "Cause of death?" Kramer tapped ashes into a metal bin. "Coroner will say blunt force trauma, probably. Hit from behind, fell, neck snapped when he hit the tile." He eyed me. "No dog bites." "That would have been too easy," I said. "The killer doesn't like easy." Kramer grunted. "I suppose you want to look closer." "I suppose you'll let me." He nodded once, curt. "Be professional." I approached the body, careful, slow, hands behind my back like a schoolboy caught where he shouldn't be. The velvet ribbon was dark blue, maybe black depending on the light, and stained along the edge. Not fresh, but recent. I didn't touch it. "What's missing from the safe?" I asked. Kramer nodded toward the uniformed officer nearby. "Ask him." The officer straightened. "Sir, it looks like some pedigree certificates and 2 registration forms." "Any financial documents?" I said. "No, sir." "Interesting. The treasurer dies beside a safe filled with paper every dog breeder worships, but the money stays untouched. Motive, not cash. Something else." I straightened and glanced around. 3 people stood near the grooming tables. the early suspects. First was Dr. Enoch Parrell, the club vet. Thin, bespectacled, hair slicked back with the kind of precision that made me suspect he sharpened his comb. His eyes were cold and still, like he was measuring the temperature of the room for pathology. Second was Madeline Rowe, champion breeder, draped in a tailored suit the colour of champagne and a manicure that looked capable of homicide. Her arms were crossed, her foot tapped a tattoo of irritation. And third was Carter Van, club president. Tall, smooth, too handsome for his own good. He wore an expression that hovered somewhere between politeness and calculation, the perfect expression for a man negotiating with his own conscience. I told Kramer, "Mind if I speak to them?" He chewed the cigar. "I'll be right here." I started with Madeline Rowe. She gave me a look like I'd tracked mud into her drawing room. "I suppose you're one of Wolfe's men," she said, voice crisp as frost. "I prefer associate," I said. "Men are so common." She bristled. "I don't see why I'm being bothered. I found the him during morning rounds, that's all." "That all?" She narrowed her eyes. "I have nothing to hide. Red herring alert. People who say they have nothing to hide always have something to hide, usually their opinion of me." "Where were you last night?" "I was at dinner with the board. Ask them." "Oh, I will. They strike me as the type who like to talk." Her jaw clicked. "If you're implying—" "I'm not. Yet." She huffed, turned away, and muttered something about amateurs. Next, Carter Van approached before I even asked. Men who step forward voluntarily in murder situations are either innocent or rehearsed. "Terrible business, Goodwin," he said. "Lawrence was a decent man. Stubborn, but decent." "You two get along?" We managed. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I can help if you need anything. The club must stay protected." Interesting priority. He blinked. "I mean, it's what Lawrence would want. The club meant everything to him." "Everything but staying alive, apparently," I said. "Where were you last night?" "Working late in my office upstairs. Alone." "Convenient," I said. He offered a thin smile. Truth usually is. Finally, Dr. Enoch Parrell. He regarded me as one might regard a barometer, useful only in context. "You're Archie Goodwin," he said calmly. "I am," I confirmed. "And you're club vet." "I don't prefer the term," he murmured. "I'm a canine temperament specialist." "Is that a real job, or did you invent it to impress the schnauzers?" He blinked once, slowly. "The animals here are champions. Their behavioral assessment is vital." "I'll take your word for it." He folded his hands. "Lawrence was tense yesterday, pacing, distracted." "About what?" He didn't say. "You hear anything unusual?" Perel considered, then shook his head. "Just the dogs. They hear everything before we do. Cryptic, unhelpful, possibly meaningful." Kramer stepped in. "Goodwin, you done?" "For now." He jerked his head toward the office. "Appointment book's on the desk. Take a look." I did. It was open to yesterday. Neat handwriting, a treasurer's pride. Most entries were mundane, grooming schedules, club dues reminders, inspection appointments. But one line stood out. "BR at 11. Bring proof." Proof of what? Proof against whom? I jotted a note. Not the evidence, just the information. Kramer nodded his approval. "You see why Wolfe might help," he said grudgingly. I gave him a sympathetic look. "It gets easier if you admit you like him." "I don't like him," Kramer snapped. "I tolerate him." "Close enough." He took a long drag on his cigar, exhaled slowly. "All right, Goodwin. Tell Wolfe what you saw, but tell him to keep out of the press. I don't need headlines about a dog club murder." "No promises." Back outside, I breathed the cool midtown air. The facade still glittered like a marble palace, but it looked different now, a theatre hiding the backstage blood. By 11:55, I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office, drinking beer from a chilled glass as if it were medicinal. "You're early," he said. "The dead man wasn't," I replied. He sighed. "Report." I did, every detail, from the safe to the suspects to the appointment book. Wolfe listened, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. When I finished, he tapped the edge of his glass. "The note," he said, "is not a person." "You're sure?" "Yes. BR stands for an event." "Such as?" "Best in ribbons, perhaps, or breeder review, or—" He lifted a brow. "Breed ranking." I whistled. "They're announcing rankings today." Precisely at 11, Wolfe said, and Gault intended to bring proof. I sat. Proof of what? Wolfe frowned. That remains the question, but if he meant to unveil something during the ranking ceremony, the killer knew. And acted first, Wolfe nodded. The killer will act again. Today? Before the event concludes. I leaned back. You're cheerful. No, Wolfe said. I am annoyed. I grinned. Same thing. He glared. Archie, confound your levity. I saluted. Confounding ongoing. He closed his eyes briefly, a sign the wheels were turning. When they opened again, steel glinted behind them. We must prepare, he said. And for once I didn't argue. The kennel secrets weren't done barking. If you've never watched a Doberman try to climb a glass trophy case, you've missed one of life's finer absurdities. That was the sight greeting me at 10:21 the next morning when I walked back into the Canine Dominion Club. Baron, the same sleek messenger of doom who'd perched on Wolfe's desk, was now throwing himself at a display of silver cups with enough force to make the entire exhibit rattle like a nervous debutante. A kennel attendant was attempting diplomacy, which mainly involved saying, "Easy boy," in 3 different tones that all meant, "Please don't get me fired." The moment Baron saw me, he let out a bark loaded with indignation and renewed his assault on the cabinet. "Take it easy," I told him. "If you're critiquing the decor, believe me, I've been doing it silently for 20 minutes. The attendant shot me a pleading look. "He's been doing this since sunrise, Mr. Goodwin. Ever since you brought him back last night, we've kept him in a private kennel like you said, but when we tried to walk him past this case, he nearly pulled the hinges off the door." "Maybe he objects to the judging committee," I said. "A lot of people do." But the dog was focused on something specific. His claws scraped against the lower glass panel, and his breath fogged the surface like he was trying to tunnel through it. I crouched to look. Inside the case, 3rd shelf from the bottom, was a velvet-lined exhibition leash. Deep blue, smooth as sin, and identical to the scrap Virginia Gault had pulled from Baron's jaw. "Well, well," I murmured, "the plot thickens, or at least the velvet does." The attendant blinked. "That thing, Miss Rowe said it's hers, for her champion." "Of course it is," I said, "because today wasn't complicated enough." I sent Baron back to his kennel with a leash the length of a city block and turned toward the grooming hall to find Madeline Rowe. She was there, naturally, giving instructions to a handler who looked like his last nervous breakdown was still in progress. She spotted me and stiffened. "Mr. Goodwin, if you've come to ask more insulting questions—" "I never insult anyone unless I like them," I said. "So consider yourself flattered." Her eyes flashed. "I'm very busy." "Your leash was found in a trophy case," I said. "A leash with the same velvet as the scrap we found on Lawrence Gault's body." That got her attention. She turned fully toward me. "Impossible. That leash was stolen from my kit 2 nights ago. I reported it to security." "You have proof?" "The report is in the front office. Ask the manager." She sounded truthful, but truth and Madeline Rowe probably only corresponded on alternate Thursdays. Still, her frustration looked real enough to merit a follow-up. "Anyone want you disqualified from competition?" I asked. Her mouth twisted. "Half this club would if they could get away with it, but only one person tried to ruin me deliberately." "Name?" "A handler I fired last month. He tried to blackmail me, claims of mistreatment, forged photos, ridiculous things. But he left the state 2 weeks ago. I checked. He boarded a train to Chicago." "A shame," I said. "He'd have made a convenient suspect." "You think I killed Lawrence Gault?" "I think," I said. "You're nervous, which might mean you're innocent. Guilty people tend to get smug." She hesitated just long enough to confirm the nerves. "If I were guilty," she said sharply, "I would hardly have let that leash be put on display." "Maybe someone else did it for you." Her face paled. "You think I'm being framed?" It wouldn't be the first time a dog club had politics nastier than Congress. Before she could reply, a gravel-coated voice behind me said, "Goodwin." I turned. Inspector Kramer stood there looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His cigar drooped. His eyes had the weary glaze of a man who'd been up against money, power, reporters, and bureaucracy before breakfast. "You're early," I said. "Breakfast cold?" "Don't start," he growled. "We're getting heat from the press already. Dominion Club's got connections, sponsors, donors, idiots with column inches to fill. Every paper in town is sniffing around for scandal." You want me to tell them to go home? No, I want you to keep Wolfe from stirring the pot. Just for today. I don't need him declaring war on the police and the Gazette. I made a thoughtful face. You're asking me nicely? For real? I'm asking, he said, jaw tight. Not ordering. Don't make me regret it. I tapped my chin. Kramer, if I could prevent Wolfe from stirring pots, I'd rent myself out as a miracle worker. He exhaled hard. Just do what you can. Sure thing. Not a chance. He leaned closer. Did you touch anything in that trophy case? Nope, just looked. Good, he said. We need that thing photographed, catalogued, dusted, and guarded until the DA decides what to do. Planning to arrest the leash? He shot me a look. Planning to avoid arresting someone the club lawyers will spend 3 months getting bail for. He moved off, barking instructions at Stebbins, who had appeared like a bulldog conjured by irritation. I returned to the case. Up close, the leash was even more suspicious. Velvet frayed at one end, like someone had torn a piece off violently, and the clasp was polished, almost too polished, as if recently scrubbed to remove residue. Someone had taken pains to clean it, someone who wanted it to seem incriminating, but not too incriminating. A little careless, a little theatrical. Red herring, big as a mastiff. By 11:44 I'd wrung what I could from the club, and Barron had finally calmed enough to stop threatening the trophies. I left the staff arguing about whether to call a glazier preemptively and headed for the exit. Outside, Manhattan looked deceptively normal. Yellow cabs, newspaper kids shouting headlines, the usual aroma of ambition and steam rising from vents. I caught a cab on 5th and gave the driver the brownstone address. We rattled uptown, and I mentally recapped the morning. Barron attacking a trophy case, a stolen exhibition leash, Madeline with a shaky alibi, a former handler conveniently out of state, Kramer begging cooperation, and Wolfe expecting a full report before his orchid hours resumed at 4. By the time I reached West 35th Street, I'd built a narrative structure that had at least 4 holes, 3 suspects, and 1 dog smarter than half the membership of the Dominion Club. Inside the brownstone, the air was warm with Fritz's paprika chicken simmering for lunch. It was 12:58, just enough time to brief Wolfe before he marched into the dining room at 1 like a tide rolling in on schedule. I headed upstairs to the office. Wolfe was already at his desk in a brown suit that looked like it had been designed for the Vatican. His eyes found me instantly. "Report," he said. "No hello?" I asked. No warm smile? No Archie, "Thank heavens you're safe from homicidal dog show contestants"? Archie. All right. I sat, crossed my legs, and began. Your friend Barron staged a 1-dog rebellion at the Dominion Club. Turns out the only critic in New York with worse manners than you before lunch is a Dobermann with a grievance. Wolfe groaned. Stop wasting oxygen. So I did. Sort of. I walked him through everything. The dog's fixation on the trophy case, the velvet-lined leash that matched the scrap from Galt's hand, Madeline's stolen property claim, the disgruntled handler in Chicago, and Kramer's weary request that Wolfe please not start a newspaper war. Wolfe drank beer from a chilled glass, nodding occasionally, eyes narrowing like the facts were lining up for inspection. When I finished, he extended his hand. The velvet. I handed him the scrap from the dog's delivery. He placed it beside the note cards on his desk, compared the weave, the shade, the frayed edges. This is not Miss Rowe's doing, he said at last. The leash was planted. You sure? Yes, Miss Rowe's leash was stolen 2 nights ago. The fragment on the corpse was torn recently. The chronology is inconsistent. Meaning the killer stole it not to frame her, but to confuse us? Meaning, Wolfe said sharply, that the killer is clever enough to arrange false trails, but not clever enough to execute them cleanly. I rose. Well, that's something. The killer's sloppy. Sloppier than intended, Wolfe corrected. The leash in the trophy case is a stage prop, a performance. Someone wants us to look in the wrong direction. Any idea who? If I did, Wolfe said, we would not be talking. We would be acting. Before I could reply, Fritz appeared at the doorway, never calling from the kitchen, with the quiet solemnity of a priest holding Eucharist. Lunch is served, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe stood. Archie, you will eat quickly. We must prepare this afternoon. For what? I asked. For the next move, Wolfe said. The killer has not finished. He swept into the dining room like a man about to pass judgment on the world's culinary sins. I followed, thinking that if the murderer wanted a second act, he'd pick the wrong cast to play with. Wolfe's mind was already pacing ahead, and once Wolfe paced, mentally anyway, someone was bound to slip, and when they did, I'd be there to catch it. The Canine Dominion Club at night had all the subtlety of a chandelier dropped into a dark alley. When I arrived at the annual gala at 7:42, the facade glowed like it had been polished with pure vanity, and the line of limousines stretching down the block looked like a parade of wealthy regrets. I straightened my tux, Wolfe's idea, not mine, and told myself that a man in formal wear automatically stood taller. I estimated a 12% improvement, maybe 13 if nobody looked closely at the sleeves. Inside, the gala was in full swing, and every creature present, human or canine, seemed determined to prove it belonged somewhere on a family crest. Chandeliers glittered over tables covered in linen so white you'd think bleach had a personal grudge. A quartet played something European and expensive. The walls were lined with pedigree charts framed in gold, each proclaiming a lineage more pampered than the average Manhattan politician. The dogs, brushed to within an inch of their lives, posed with their owners like titled royalty accepting citizens at court. I'd barely gotten 3 steps inside before Carter Van, club president and professional charmer, took the stage for a speech. He was the type who could give a eulogy and make it sound like an investment opportunity. "Tradition," he declared, "is the backbone of excellence." His eyes swept the room the way a man watches a loaded roulette wheel, intent, calculating, ready to collect or cut his losses. While he pontificated, I scanned the crowd for Virginia Galt. She wasn't hard to find: red hair, anxious energy, and a habit of slipping through crowds like a rumor seeking shelter. She'd come because her brother Lawrence's murder had rattled the entire club, but she moved like someone carrying more than grief. At 7:53, she ducked through a side door marked Authorized Personnel Only, a restricted archive room. Not exactly the place one goes to sample hors d'oeuvres. I made a note to follow up when Van finished droning about honor, dignity, and the noble spirit of competitive dog breeding, a phrase that would have made Wolfe emit a seismic pfui. Before I could begin my quiet pursuit, a waiter passed with champagne. I declined on principle. Working and drinking only mix well if you work in advertising. Instead, I kept my eyes open. The room was buzzing, but underneath the chatter was tension, a brittle hum like an overtuned violin ready to snap. At 8:06, the snap came. A choked gasp cut through the music. Guests turned. I turned. Dr. Enoch Parrell, the club vet with the bedside manner of a metronome, staggered to center stage. His champagne flute slipped from his hand, shattering on the polished floor. He clutched his throat, eyes bulging, knees buckling. For a second you could hear nothing but the soft whine of a spaniel somewhere near the pillars. Then pandemonium hit. Parrell collapsed face first on the platform, limbs twitching once, then going still. Dogs barked, women shrieked. Reporters, who apparently materialized from thin air, surged like hungry gulls. Carter Van froze mid-sentence, his composure flickering like a candle in a draught. I moved. Fast. By the time I reached Parrell, 2 handlers were already kneeling beside him. I checked his pulse, not that it mattered. His eyes had the vacant stare of a man who'd just learned the final truth the hard way. Beside his body lay his champagne flute, the dregs still bubbling faintly. Poison. No question. I slipped into the hallway before the stampede trampled me and pulled out my phone to call Wolfe. He answered immediately, which meant he'd been waiting. "Report," he demanded. "Parrell just took a curtain call without rehearsing," I said. "Collapsed on stage. Poisoned champagne." A grunt. "Cause?" "Classic sudden shutdown. Twitching, convulsing. I'd say something quick and tidy." "Confound it," Wolfe muttered. "Search him." "Search? Wolfe, there's an entire gala out there. Search. His pockets. Carefully. Bring me vocabulary, not objections." His tone left no room for negotiation. I returned to Parrell. Kramer hadn't arrived yet, which was a blessing. I knelt and slid my hand discreetly into Parrell's inner jacket pocket. Something soft brushed my fingers. A velvet ribbon. White, clean, untorn. Not the dark blue scrap from Galt's hand, but the same rich velvet, Another piece from the same set. Just like the one found with Galt, only pristine, like a ceremonial twin instead of a bloody warning. I pocketed the ribbon long enough to step back into the hallway and call Wolfe again. "You found it," he said, before I opened my mouth. "You sound smug," I said. "I hate when you're smug. It's like watching a glacier applaud itself." "Describe it." I did. Clean, smooth, identical ribbon, no blood. His answer was immediate. 2 men, 2 ribbons. They are not symbols, Archie, they are instructions. Instructions for what? I don't yet know, but the killer is using them as cues, stages in a sequence. "Meaning Parrell was meant to die," I said slowly, "just like Galt." "Yes, and the performance is not over," I whistled. "Great. I do love a good encore." Before he could retort, a commotion erupted behind me. Kramer finally arrived with Stebbins in tow, both looking like they'd been summoned from a crime scene buffet. Kramer's cigar bobbed furiously. "Goodwin!" he barked. What? Why is it always you?" "Luck," I said innocently. "Or maybe I'm cursed." His nostrils flared, but he didn't yell. That alone told me the evening was bad enough. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "Exactly." I gave him the play-by-play. When I got to the part about the ribbon, he paused. "You're sure Parrell had it?" "I don't smuggle souvenirs," I said. "I handed it directly to the officer over there." I had. Evidence stays with cops, not with Archie Goodwin. Kramer took a breath. "All right, Wolfe's boy. For once I'm not arguing." He turned to Stebbins. "Shut the room, nobody in or out. Lock down the glasses." Then he looked at me. "Tell Wolfe I'm not fighting him on this, not tonight." It was the closest thing to a compliment Kramer had given us since the Harding administration. As the investigation swarmed, I stepped back, letting the uniforms do their work. Dogs barked in the distance, confused, anxious. The entire gala had curdled into panic. At 8:38, I slipped out through a side exit and caught a cab uptown. Wolfe would want every detail before orchid hours at 9. When I reached the brownstone at 8:54, I found him in the office wearing a charcoal suit that signalled he meant business. "Well?" he asked. "Parrell's dead. Poisoned. Ribbon found in his pocket. Kramer cooperating for once. Reporters circling like vultures who've learned to read budgets." Wolfe grunted. "And Miss Galt?" "She was sneaking into a restricted archive room before the excitement. I think she's hiding something." "She is," Wolfe said flatly. "But not what you think." I folded my arms. "You reading minds now?" "No," he said. "I am reading sequence. The killer has accelerated. The second death occurred faster than anticipated." "To hide their tracks." "To maintain rhythm," Wolfe corrected. "This is choreography." I took a breath. "So what's the next move?" He glared. "If I knew that, I would not require your legs, Archie." His tone was sharp, but underneath it was concern, a subtle inflection he reserved exclusively for me, whether he liked it or not. He gestured toward the Dobermann curled near the elevator. Baron lifted his head and growled, low and unhappy. "Archie," Wolfe said, "I forbid you from bringing that beast into this office again." "He followed me," I lied. "Phooey," Wolfe muttered, rare and resonant. Before I could defend myself, Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, never calling from the kitchen, with a tray of coffee and biscuits, a peace offering for the tension gathering in the room. Wolfe dismissed him with a nod, then fixed his eyes on me. "The killer," he said, voice low, "will strike a third time, and soon." "Tonight?" "Possibly. Be prepared." I nodded and grabbed my notebook. Another ribbon, another victim, and the gala had only been Act 2. If there's one thing I hate more than rummaging through dusty archives, it's watching other people rummage through them better than I can. That was the morning's entertainment at 9:43, as Saul Pantzer, Ori Cather and I split the day's drudgery like we were carving a corpse at a medical seminar. Saul taking the financial entrails, Ori sniffing around handlers and gossip hounds, and yours truly condemned to the Dominion Club's records room with enough paperwork to wallpaper the Chrysler Building. The archives smelled like old glue and richer people's mistakes. I flipped through membership ledgers, championship lists, dues logs, most of it tidy enough to pass Wolfe's scrutiny, though not tidy enough to hide human nature. At 10:21, Virginia Galt appeared in the doorway like someone who'd sprinted through 3 emotional thunderstorms and a light drizzle of regret. Her eyes were ringed dark, and she clutched her purse as if assassins were after the loose change. "Archie," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." I pushed aside a stack of kennel invoices. "If it's a confession of undying love, I should warn you, I'm expensive." She didn't smile. "It's about the ledger. My brother found a discrepancy, thousands missing from the club's accounts. He was going to confront Carter Van about it." "Van?" I raised an eyebrow. "Club president, smooth talker, uses hair oil like it's diplomacy." "Yes, Lawrence thought Van was siphoning money, or at least covering for someone who was." "Well," I said, "that gives motive enough to fill a kennel." She wrung her hands. "I thought I could handle it myself, but after the gala, after Dr. Parrell, I can't. I'm afraid. I didn't know Lawrence was withdrawing money too." "That was new." "He was?" She nodded. "Large amounts, weeks ago." There it was, a classic red herring flapping in the stale basement air. It muddied everything nicely, maybe too nicely. "Virginia," I said gently, "if your brother was stealing, that doesn't clear Van. It just complicates the dance." "He wasn't stealing," she insisted. He was arranging something. He said it had to do with the club's reputation." "Reputation?" I repeated. "This bunch guards their reputation like diamonds and kills for less." Before she could elaborate, Ori slipped into the doorway. "Got something," he said. "Handlers are talking. Galt made enemies. Lots of them." "He was treasurer," I said. "Occupational hazard." No, this was different. Ori's grin was thin. He'd been asking questions. That was the kind of detail that made Wolfe lean forward in his chair, and me lean back, because leaning forward meant I'd soon be running up and down Manhattan chasing answers nobody wanted found. I sent Ori to trail a handler with loose lips, then returned to the ledger. I flipped to recent entries and saw it immediately. The last 4 pages had been removed days before the murder, not the morning of. Cleanly sliced, but aged enough to show they'd been missing for a while. "That's interesting," I murmured. Virginia hovered. "What does it mean?" "It means," I said, "your brother didn't stumble onto this 2 days ago. Someone planned ahead, someone clever and patient." She shivered. "Do you know who?" "No, but they know we're looking." I closed the ledger, and that makes them nervous. Nervous killers do rash things. At 11:12 my phone buzzed. Kramer, his version of a gentle summons. "Goodwin," he grunted when I answered. "Come to the northeast hallway, and alone." When a man like Kramer says alone, you either go or you get subpoenaed to explain why you didn't. I found him leaning against a display case of silver medallions, cigar unlit but clamped in his teeth like it was fueling him through willpower alone. He jerked his chin toward a quieter corner. "Wolfe told you about those ribbons." I kept my face neutral. "He mentioned patterns." Kramer snorted. "Not far-fetched. Hate admitting that, but there it is." "That hurt?" I asked. "Shut up," he chewed harder. "The DA wants a suspect fast, real fast. And Madeline Rowe looks good on paper. Motive, opportunity, stolen leash, bad temper." "That's ridiculous," I said. "She's being framed." "Doesn't matter," he said. "Public thinks she did it. Press loves her as a villain. A woman with a pedigree obsession. Headlines write themselves." "That's why it's a frame-up," I countered. "Too pretty, too easy." He exhaled slowly. "I know. But unless Wolfe gives me something good, the DA will push her into a cell before dinner." "You want Wolfe's help," I said softly. "Don't get poetic. I want this solved clean. That's it." But that, in Kramer language, was practically a love sonnet. When we parted, he slapped my shoulder, not affectionately but not hostile either, and growled, "Tell Wolfe I'm waiting, but if he stirs trouble, I'll bury you both under paperwork." "Understood," I said. By noon 38, I was on my way back to the brownstone, carrying notes, suspicions, and a headache the size of a mastiff. Fritz met me at the door, not doing legwork, just passing from dining room to kitchen with the grace of a man who had never once bumped into furniture. "Lunch is ready," he informed me. "Braised veal." "I'll try to eat delicately," I promised, in case Wolfe faints from shock. In the office, Wolfe was already at his desk, receiving Fritz's dish with reverence. He didn't touch his beer, sign of a serious day. I launched into the report. Virginia's confession, ledger discrepancies, Galt's mysterious withdrawals, Ori's gossip harvest, Kramer's warning. Wolfe ate in complete silence, pausing only to gesture for me to continue. When I finished, he dabbed his mouth and leaned back. "We are dealing," he said slowly, "with someone who understands sequence. The dog, the velvet, the gala, each step meticulously arranged." "Sure," I said, "but if the killer starts juggling pedigrees next, I'm resigning." The corner of Wolfe's mouth twitched. On anyone else it would have been a smile. On Wolfe it was a full embrace. I continued. The ledger pages were removed days before Galt died. Someone planned this long in advance. "Yes," Wolfe murmured, "and someone believes the cleverness of the sequence will shield them." "And will it?" "No," he stiffened. "Archie." Oh. That tone meant enlightenment approaching. "What?" He pointed, not at me, not at his orchids, but at his desk. "Something is amiss." I frowned. "What's wrong?" "Evidence," Wolfe said coldly, "has been planted in this house. When a Doberman decides your office decor needs rearranging, there isn't much to do except pray it doesn't choose the mahogany." At 7:48 that evening, Baron, our uninvited four-legged houseguest, gave a low growl, planted one paw on Wolfe's blotter, and with a swift shove worthy of a disgruntled critic, sent the entire pad gliding off the desk like a stage prop in a cheap melodrama. It hit the carpet, flipped once, and landed face down with the sort of dramatic timing that makes you suspicious of coincidence. "Hey," I snapped, reaching to steady the inkstand before it followed. "You're lucky Wolfe isn't here, pal. He'd have a stroke in 3 languages. Baron didn't apologize. Instead, he nosed at the edge of the blotter, pawed it, and revealed something hiding underneath Wolfe's desk calendar. Something I swear hadn't been there an hour ago. A small, neatly wrapped brown paper parcel. I froze, then crouched, then froze again. Inside the parcel, when I carefully unwrapped it, lay a third velvet ribbon, identical material, newly folded, no blood, no tear. But the note tucked beneath it was worse, typed, short. "Wolfe is hiding club ledger pages. Search the brownstone." I felt my temperature climb 10 degrees. Wolfe's voice from behind me finished the job. "Archie?" I stood so fast I nearly knocked the dog into the elevator shaft. Wolfe had come down early from the plant rooms, still in his yellow shirt, one hand gripping the railing of the elevator cage as if steadying himself against nausea. "Someone," he said quietly, "has invaded this house." The way he said this house would have made a burglar reconsider every career choice he'd ever made. I held the note out. "Found under your blotter," Baron uncovered it. Wolfe extended 2 fingers, not touching the note, merely inspecting it like offensive graffiti. His eyes darkened. "This is insolent." "That's one word," I said. "I've got a few spicier ones." He turned to me fully, and what I saw wasn't anger. It was injury, an affront that hit the core of Wolfe's world. Order, sanctuary, control. If someone had slapped Fritz with a trout, Wolfe wouldn't have looked more offended. "They entered," Wolfe murmured. "My office." "That's the idea." I tried to lighten the moment. "If you want, I can post sentries. Maybe hire a firing squad, or train Baron here as a guard." "I agree," Wolfe interrupted. That shut me up. "You agree, to sentries?" His jaw tightened. "Saul Panzer will spend the night here, armed. When Wolfe calls Saul for a sleepover, things are bad." The dog nudged my hand. I scratched his head and exhaled. "All right, we'll fortify the place, but first, I'm calling Kramer." Wolfe didn't argue. That alone was a sign of apocalypse. I called. 10 minutes later, at 8:17, Kramer arrived. No shouting, no threats, just his shoulders hunched under his coat and an unlit cigar clamped in his jaw like it had personally wronged him. He stepped into the office, eyed Baron, eyed me, then the note. "Damn," he muttered. "Someone wants you both set up like Christmas ornaments." "I suggested that earlier," I said, minus the seasonal metaphor. Kramer approached the desk. "Let me see the parcel." I handed him the wrapping paper, not the ribbon, which was already sealed in a paper evidence envelope, and handed to him. "Evidence stays with cops, always." He read the note twice, jaw working. Whoever this is wants the department and Wolfe tearing at each other's throats. I'm not playing along. It was the closest Kramer had ever come to holding Wolfe's hand and singing a duet. Wolfe gave a stiff nod, which, in his universe, was a bear hug. I presume, Wolfe said, you have examined the typeface. Kramer nodded. Standard, cheap. Could have come from any typewriter on the eastern seaboard. I cleared my throat. But the handwriting on the brown paper wrapping, it's imitating Carter Van. Kramer snapped his eyes to me. Van? The president? I pointed to the slanted capital letters on the paper's edge. He signs event certificates. I saw him write one earlier today. Same habit of lifting the pen before finishing the downstroke. Wolfe closed his eyes in concentration. Sloppy imitation. The killer wishes the police to suspect Mr. Van next. Why? Kramer asked. Wolfe opened his eyes. Because Mr. Van is the intended third victim. Kramer swore softly through his teeth. Damn it. And he's probably alone at home right now. That was our cue. I grabbed my coat. I'll go. Wolfe made a low, displeased sound. Archie. Look, I said, you can't go, and you need someone with legs. Kramer added, and a badge shadowing him will scare him into silence. Goodwin's the right choice. Wolfe scowled but didn't argue. Instead, he pressed his fingertips together. Do not go alone. I'm not dragging Saul out of bed, I said. He'll be here guarding you. I do not require guarding, Wolfe snapped. Yeah, well, the killer doesn't know that. And if someone tries to plant more evidence while I'm out, Saul's the best man to stop it. Wolfe inhaled deeply through his nose, like a man swallowing pride and indigestion. He shifted his gaze to me. The anger was gone. What remained was something rarer in Wolfe, worry coated in formality. Archie, he said quietly, if Mr. Van dies tonight, the sequence will continue, and if the killer knows you have deduced their intent, you will be next. I grinned. Don't worry, I'm harder to choreograph. His tone deepened. I prefer you returned alive. It hit harder than a slap. Wolfe didn't say things like that unless the universe was tilting dangerously far off its axis. I'll be fine, I said lightly. You might even miss me. Archie. The way he said my name could have stopped traffic from here to Brooklyn. I buttoned my coat. I'll call the moment I reach Van. Kramer stepped aside. Good luck, Goodwin. Barron barked once, sharp and urgent, as if telling me to get moving. As I left the office, Wolfe's voice followed, low, precise, grim. Archie, be wary. The door closed behind me. The night outside smelled like cold stone, exhaust, and imminent murder. If you've never spent the night babysitting a terrified club president in a penthouse filled with glass art and nervous sweat, congratulations, you've lived better than I have. At 11:48 that night, Carter Van's 32nd floor apartment felt less like a refuge and more like a pressure cooker decorated by someone who believed money could buy safety. It can't. Money only buys taller windows for someone to push you out of. Van paced the length of his living room for the 17th time, fingers twitching at the cuffs of his silk robe. Goodwin, he said, you're sure this is necessary? Look, I said from the armchair, you want the truth? Wolfe thinks you're next on someone's choreography list. If he's right, you're safer with me sitting here ruining your carpet with my shoes than you are alone. That's very comforting. I try, I said. My doctor says cynicism keeps me young. He kept pacing. His penthouse was ritzy in the way people choose when they want the world to know they've arrived. Chrome fixtures, sharp lines, rugs soft enough to offend a conscience. But none of it mattered. The air was thick with fear. Van's not mine. At 12:31, I checked in with Saul at the brownstone. He reported nothing unusual. Fritz had retired upstairs and Wolfe was thinking. Saul didn't need to elaborate. When Wolfe thinks past midnight, worlds shift. Van brought over a tray with coffee. Can you stay awake all night? He asked. Can a fish swim? I said. Can a dog bark? Can Wolfe disapprove? Yes to all three. He tried a smile but gave up halfway. Goodwin, I know who killed Lawrence. I sat up straight. You can say that before dawn, preferably not after. Not yet, he whispered. Not until I'm sure. That's a bad plan. It's the only plan I have. I didn't push him, not then. Fear has a way of rearranging a man's priorities, and tonight Vans were sliding like chess pieces knocked by a drunk opponent. By 2:58, Van had finally stopped pacing and settled at his desk, pretending to sort papers while really listening for death. I had taken to sitting near the foyer where the hallway light leaked under the door like a timid visitor. At 3:17 a.m., everything changed. The lights flickered, once, twice, then died. The apartment went black. Before my eyes adjusted, I heard it. A single Doberman bark echoing faintly from the hallway, deep and sharp. Impossible, the Dominion Club had no dogs registered here, and this building didn't allow pets larger than a shoebox. "Goodwin?" Van's voice cracked. "Was that—" "Stay back," I said. I was already on my feet, gun drawn, not waving it around, just holding it low and ready, the way Wolfe preferred when his legman walked into stupid decisions. The lights buzzed, sputtered, then came back at half strength like a tired man rising from a sickbed. I moved silently to the door, cracked it open, and stepped into the corridor. Dim, long, quiet, except at the far end of the hallway a shadow jerked back around the corner. I didn't have time to warn Van. A strangled gasp came from behind me. I spun, ran. Van was half collapsed over his desk, eyes wide, hand reaching weakly toward me. A knife protruded from his ribs, one clean thrust, expertly placed. Around the handle, tied tight and neat as a bow on a Christmas parcel, was a red velvet ribbon. The third ribbon. "Van!" I grabbed him, easing him to the floor. "Hold on. Don't talk, just breathe." He coughed, a wet, awful sound. Blood stained his lips. "Check," he whispered. "I'm here. Don't force it. Check the temperaments, not the pedigrees." His head fell back. Gone. For a heartbeat the room spun, but only for a heartbeat. There was work to do, and Wolfe had trained me too well to freeze. The killer hadn't vanished. They'd slipped out through a service door at the far end of the corridor. I bolted after them. I was 20 feet down the hallway when something slammed into my shins. A dog, a Dobermann, younger and wirier than Baron, released as a distraction. It snarled, blocking the stairwell. "Not now," I muttered, dodging left. The dog barked, lunged again, and I had no desire to shoot an innocent animal. Not tonight, not ever. So I leapt around it, sprinted the last yards, and threw open the stairwell door. Empty. Whoever I was chasing had planned the diversion perfectly. A dog down the hall, power cut, quick ambush, clean escape. Too clean. I tore down 2 flights anyway, checked both exits, and found nothing except the faint echo of footsteps long gone. At 3:46 a.m. I called Wolfe. He answered on the first ring. "Archie." The tone made my stomach tighten. "Van's dead," I said. "Stabbed. Velvet ribbon tied to the handle." Silence. Heavy. Immense. Then, "Return. Immediately." "I'm coming," I said. "Just brace yourself." I am braced. I clicked off and caught the next cab downtown. The city at 4 a.m. is a ghost in a grey overcoat, and I rode through it feeling like someone had pulled the plug on the world's order. When I reached the brownstone at 4:12 a.m., Wolfe was waiting in the office, not seated but standing, fingers gripping the back of his chair. Wolfe doesn't stand unless the situation threatens the foundation of civilization or his personal dignity. Tonight, it was both. He looked at me. "Report." I told him everything, every detail, every sound, every scrap of shadow in the hall. When I repeated Van's dying words, Wolfe's eyelids flickered. "Temperaments," he said softly. "Archie, that is vital." "I thought you'd say that," I said, "because if it meant pedigrees, he'd have said pedigrees." "Archie." "Yes?" "Do not trifle." The warmth in his voice could have thawed Lake Placid. I sank into the red leather chair. "I'm docking your pay for emotional labour." "Phooey." "You love me." He glared, which in Wolfe language translates to "stop tempting fate." At 4:42, Wolfe finally sat. "Archie, tomorrow at 6 p.m. you will bring every remaining suspect to this office. No exceptions." I raised an eyebrow. "Even Madeline, even the handlers." "All." "You want a brownstone circus." "I want," Wolfe said, "the killer." He rang the bell cord once, a sharp, decisive gesture. Fritz appeared, not calling from the kitchen, not announcing anything, simply standing with the quiet presence of a man who has served kings and survived them. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "coffee." Fritz bowed and vanished. Wolfe turned back to me. Notify Kramer, I called. Kramer picked up with a bark. Goodwin, what is it now? Wolfe wants quiet police presence outside the brownstone at 6 tomorrow. He's rounding up every suspect for a showdown. A pause, then, unexpectedly, All right, Wolfe, Kramer said, not to me. I'll wait for your report. When I hung up, Wolfe was adjusting the chairs, actually adjusting them himself. Straighter, aligned, perfect. A courtroom forming in real time. The desk was cleared, papers squared, lighting adjusted. Wolfe's web was tightening, and the killer would walk straight into it. At 6 o'clock sharp, the brownstone felt less like Wolfe's sanctuary and more like a courtroom last used for a high-stakes execution. The office lights were turned up to the brightness Wolfe preferred when he intended to dissect human lies, and the air carried the faint perfume of orchids drifting down from the plant rooms, just enough to remind everyone whose territory they'd entered. By 6:03, every chair was filled. Madeline Rowe perched like a hawk ready to recite pedigree crimes, Virginia Galt trembling but composed, 3 handlers shifting nervously, and 2 board members pretending they weren't terrified. Kramer stood against the wall with his arms folded, jaw set around an unlit cigar, eyes sharp. Stebbins loomed near the door like a bulldog guarding a butcher shop. Wolfe sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression carved from granite. He didn't need to call the room to order. The room ordered itself. I took my usual post near the globe stand, notebook ready, gun holstered, and patience entirely optional. Ladies and gentlemen, Wolfe began, I thank you for attending at my invitation. Somehow he made invitation sound like summons. We are here to determine intention, not rumour, not conjecture, not the absurdities that your club's internecine politics have produced, but intention. Madeline huffed. I assume, she said sharply, that this is about those velvet ribbons. Yes, Wolfe replied, among other things. I'll say this. Wolfe's voice when he wants obedience could strip wallpaper. Tonight, it could peel bark from a redwood. He gestured toward the 3 evidence envelopes arranged neatly before him. These velvet ribbons, he said, have been presented as tokens of guilt. First, in Mr. Lawrence Galt's hand. Second, in Dr. Parrell's pocket. Third, tied to the instrument used to murder Mr. Carter Van. Virginia sucked in a shaky breath. Madeline looked ready to leap across the room just to prove she wasn't next on the list. Before we proceed, Wolfe continued, I will dispel a misconception. These ribbons do not concern dog breeds. They never did. One handler frowned. But they're show ribbons. No. Wolfe's tone cut him off like a guillotine. They are temperament ribbons. The handlers blinked. The board members shifted. Kramer's eyebrow rose a millimeter. Wolfe looked to me. Archie. I handed him the laminated sheets Saul had acquired from the Dominion Club archives. Temperament classifications used by Dr. Parrell during evaluations. Calm, aggressive, timid, high drive, ribbon-coded, internal use only. Wolfe lifted the sheet. These, he said, are the categories, and these ribbons, he tapped the envelopes, correspond precisely. The killer selected each ribbon to indicate the temperament of the victim. Temperament? Madeline snapped. My dog has better temperament than half these people. Indeed, Wolfe replied, but the killer was not judging dogs. She was judging people. Silence hit the room like a dropped safe. She? Kramer said quietly. Yes, Wolfe said, she. All eyes turned toward the women in the room. Virginia froze. Madeline bristled. The handlers glanced at each other as if reassessing every conversation they'd had that week. Wolfe continued, unhurried. Before I name the culprit, I will dispose of a false presumption, Miss Rowe. Madeline flared. I told you, I didn't kill anyone. My leash was stolen. Yes, Wolfe said, and it was stolen 2 nights before Mr. Galt's murder. You had no access to it afterward, and your whereabouts during the gala poisonings are substantiated by 3 witnesses who had no cause to favour you. Madeline folded her arms triumphantly. One handler muttered something about apologies. Wolfe ignored both. Next, he said, Mr. Galt's financial discoveries. Contrary to rumour, he did not steal from the club. He made withdrawals to compile evidence discreetly, preparing to expose the guilty party. Virginia's eyes welled. I knew it, she whispered. He was trying to help. Yes, Wolfe said, and he paid with his life. He let that sit. Then he drew out one of the envelopes and opened it, removing the first velvet ribbon, the one found in Galt's fist. This ribbon, Wolfe said, signified defiance. Dr. Parrell used it to flag dogs that resisted restraint. A handler nodded slowly. It's true. Parrell always called the blue strip the stubborn ribbon. Precisely. Wolfe leaned back slightly. Mr. Galt resisted blackmail. He resisted corruption. He resisted the killer. He placed the ribbon down. The second ribbon, the one in Perel's pocket, came out next. This, Wolfe said, signified timidity. It marked animals easily frightened or compliant. Madeline blinked. Parrell? Timid? He was a snake. No, Wolfe said. He was a coward. When confronted by the killer about the thefts, he capitulated. He agreed to help frame Miss Rowe, and for his cowardice he was eliminated. He placed the second ribbon down. The third ribbon, the one tied to the knife that killed Van, slid free last. And this, Wolfe said softly, signifies aggression. It was used only for the most volatile animals. I saw Madeline shudder. Virginia leaned forward, knuckles white. Mr. Van, Wolfe continued, became aggressive when cornered. He discovered the truth hours before his death. He intended to expose the culprit, but delayed until morning. A fatal error. He placed the third ribbon down in a row. Then he looked at the room, not slowly but sharply, scanning each face with cold precision. Thus, Wolfe said, the killer's pattern becomes clear. She assigned judgment to each victim and coded that judgment using Dr. Parrell's tools. Virginia whispered, She? Madeline hissed, Who? Wolfe turned slightly, gaze settling on the back row. Rebecca Sloane, he said. The room convulsed. Rebecca, small, mousy Parrell's assistant, had been sitting quietly, hands folded, eyes downward. Now she looked up, face drained. That's ridiculous, she said. Impossible. No, Wolfe said calmly. Inevitable. She shook her head furiously. You're inventing this. Wolfe didn't blink. You embezzled club funds. You altered temperament logs. When Mr. Galt discovered discrepancies, you silenced him. When Dr. Parrell refused further cooperation, you poisoned him. When Mr. Van deduced your involvement, you stabbed him. Rebecca rose, trembling. You have no proof. Wolfe tapped the envelopes. The ribbons are proof. Your handwriting on the forged note planted in my office is proof. And your motive, ambition, is overwhelming. Kramer straightened. Stebbins pushed off the wall, ready. Rebecca backed toward the doorway. No, you can't know that. Wolfe's voice stayed level. Witnesses err, documents deceive, but human intention is immutable. That did it. Rebecca bolted. Stebbins lunged first, grabbing her arm with a force that could stop a train. Kramer blocked the escape route, eyes blazing but controlled. Easy, he said. You're done. Rebecca twisted, desperate. Let me go. You don't understand. Parrell was stealing, not me. Incorrect, Wolfe murmured. Rebecca froze as though stabbed. Mr. Parrell, Wolfe said, was incompetent, venal, and weak. But he was not clever enough to orchestrate this. You were. Rebecca sagged in Stebbins's grip. I didn't mean to kill Galt, she whispered. He pushed. He kept digging. And the others? Wolfe asked. She shut her eyes. Parrell was going to betray me. Van said he'd expose me at the next board meeting. Virginia sobbed softly. Madeline muttered a curse. Rebecca looked at Wolfe with hollow rage. You weren't supposed to figure it out. You weren't even part of this world. Wolfe breathed in slowly, as if exhausted not by her crimes but by humanity itself. No murderer kills within my city, he said, without entering my world. Kramer nodded once at Stebbins. They hauled Rebecca toward the hall. Before the door closed, Kramer turned to Wolfe. All right, Wolfe, he said, grudging but real. I'll wait for your report. The door clicked shut. Silence expanded through the room like a released breath. Wolfe sagged back into his chair, the weight of the entire case pressing into his shoulders. For a moment, just a moment, his eyes closed. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe exhausted, imagine a mountain deciding it needs a rest. I stepped forward. You all right? His eyelids opened. Archie, he said, voice low, bring me a beer. I grinned. That's the Wolfe equivalent of a victory parade. Phooey. Fritz arrived at the doorway with perfect timing. No shouting from the kitchen, no fuss, holding a chilled glass and a bottle on a silver tray. Outside, the orchids' perfume drifted faintly, their quiet approval hanging in the air. Inside, Wolfe lifted the glass, took a single sip, and exhaled. The ribbons were explained, the killer exposed. But beneath it all, Wolfe's eyes held a flicker, a small, sharp signal. Something was still missing. By 10:42 the next morning, the brownstone was quieter than a guilty conscience, and I was doing my best not to fall asleep sitting upright in Wolfe's red chair. Wolfe was pretending to read a monograph on canine behavioral pathology, strictly for thematic effect, but I could tell from the angle of his eyebrows he wasn't absorbing a single word. Between the orchids' morning session, last night's confrontation, and Kramer's paperwork stampede, the house felt like it had survived a polite version of war. Then Baron, our resident Doberman and part-time anarchist, decided the investigation wasn't over. I had just lifted my coffee, the first cup of the day, which is sacred territory, when Baron padded across the office, planted himself in front of Wolfe's desk, and stared at Wolfe with the solemnity of a judge sentencing someone to life. "Now what?" I muttered. "If he starts filing motions, I'm resigning." Baron ignored me and nudged open Wolfe's bottom desk drawer with his nose. My coffee hit the carpet. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Archie." "Don't look at me," I said. "He works freelance." Baron nudged the drawer again, harder. The metal runners clattered. Wolfe, with a sigh that suggested both resignation and curiosity, set aside the monograph and leaned forward. Slowly, like a man approaching the edge of a cliff he wasn't sure he wanted to look over. He pulled the drawer fully open. Inside, beneath a stack of unused file folders and a misplaced invoice for Fritz's truffles, was a folded piece of paper, aged, crinkled, and thick, like ledger stock. Wolfe froze. I stepped closer. He lifted the sheet. "Galt's missing ledger page," Wolfe murmured, voice low and reverent. I blinked. "The one that disappeared from the books 2 days before he died?" "Yes, and the page Rebecca intended to destroy." "But how did—" Baron barked once firmly. Then he sat, chest out, proud as a decorated veteran. I stared at the dog. "Are you telling me," I said, "that this four-legged postal worker delivered the evidence before the killer even made her move?" Wolfe examined the page, a clean account showing the exact funds Rebecca embezzled, complete with her forged authorization signature, neat but with the same pen-lift flaw as on the brown paper wrapping. Proof. Absolute. "Galt," Wolfe said, "must have trained the animal to carry messages. Perhaps not long distances, but to deliver objects discreetly within the club. The dog was loyal to him." He paused. "And when Mr. Galt was killed, Baron retreated to the only safe place he knew." I put my hands on my hips. "Wolfe's desk." "Yes." "You're telling me this Doberman has been working for you longer than I have?" Wolfe looked up sharply. "Do not be absurd," I grinned. "Well, he found the evidence. He sniffed out the planted note. He led us to the trophy case." "You remain," Wolfe said dryly. "Safe for now, Archie." An insult or a compliment, depending on the weather. Baron gave a satisfied snort and settled at the base of Wolfe's desk like he owned stock in the place. Before I could declare him my replacement, Kramer arrived. No stomping, no erupted volcano of indignation, just a long exhale as he stepped into the office. He looked older than he had last night. Murder investigations do that to a man, but so does respecting Wolfe, and today he had done both. "Wolfe," Kramer said, voice low. "I saw the confession. The DA's satisfied. Sloan will be arraigned, but I need to close the report cleanly." He paused as Baron barked once at him. Kramer eyed the dog. "Is he your new secretary?" "Temporarily," I said. "He works for treats." Wolfe shot me a glare potent enough to wilt bamboo. Kramer continued. "The ribbons, the temperament codes, the timing. You cracked it before anyone else even knew what puzzle they were looking at." He cleared his throat. "You saved us months of circling blind. Not saying I like that, but credit where due." The world went silent. Wolfe receiving praise from Kramer is like watching a glacier wink. Wolfe nodded once. "Your diligence ensured no further deaths, Inspector. Justice required cooperation." Kramer's cigar twitched upward. "That's as close to a compliment as I'll ever get from you." "All right, I'll take it." They stared at each other a moment. The mutual integrity of two men who'd rather swallow thumbtacks than admit they occasionally needed one another. Kramer tapped his hat brim. "We're done here. I've got paperwork. Stebbins will swing by in case you find anything else hidden in the furniture." He paused as Baron snorted again. "All right, fine," Kramer muttered. "You too, hotshot." He left, the door clicking shut behind him. Wolfe set the ledger page neatly on his blotter. "Archie," he said, "the theme of this case is evident." "Don't say pedigree," I said. "I'm allergic." "No." Wolfe leaned back. "Temperament." I blinked. "The dog clue?" "The murders," Wolfe said. "The victims, the killer, the ribbons, the club, even the dog. In dogs and in humans, pedigree is irrelevant if temperament is flawed or virtuous." He lifted the ledger page. Galt's integrity, Parrell's cowardice, Van's aggression, and Miss Sloane's ambition. He exhaled. Temperament determined every action. I had to admit he had a point. So the dog saved the day. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Archie." "Yes?" "You are not to say that to anyone." I raised both hands innocently. "Of course not. I would never suggest Wolfe was upstaged by a Dobermann with a resume." Before Wolfe could unleash a pfui, Baron nudged his knee. Wolfe recoiled half an inch, then glowered at me like I had orchestrated the betrayal. "Archie," he said, "remove the animal." Baron rested his chin on Wolfe's instep. "Nope," I said cheerfully. "He's union now." Wolfe stared at me with volcanic disdain. "Union?" "He negotiated it," I said. "Standard benefits. Daily pats, hazard pay, and equal representation at the desk." "Archie." "Yes?" "Remove the animal." "He won't budge," I said. "He's decided to guard your blotter. Frankly, he's doing a better job than I do." Baron thumped his tail in agreement. Wolfe closed his eyes as though appealing to the gods of logic. None answered. They rarely do in the brownstone. Finally, he lifted a hand to the bell cord and pulled. Fritz appeared instantly, not shouting from the kitchen, but arriving with the telepathic timing only Fritz has. "Yes, sir?" "Dinner," Wolfe said, resigned. "Veal with mustard sauce," Fritz replied, nodding. "And a chilled glass?" Wolfe glanced at the dog, then at me, then at the ceiling, where perhaps the universe kept its cosmic complaint box. "Yes," he said, "a chilled glass." Fritz departed. I sat on the rug next to Baron, scratching behind his ears. "You know," I said to Wolfe, "considering he delivered the ledger page, uncovered the note, and found the desk drawer clue, you might want to give him a raise." Wolfe's eyelids lowered dangerously. "Archie." "Purely a suggestion," I said. "Morale is important." Wolfe massaged his temples. "Confound you." "It's mutual," I said. Baron barked softly, approving the sentiment. Wolfe stared at the ceiling another long beat, searching for patience. It did not descend. He reached for his beer the moment Fritz set the tray down, took a sip, and let out a breath that released the last tension of the case. The killer was caught, the ledger page recovered, the pattern solved, and Wolfe's office, though invaded, insulted, and briefly commandeered by a Dobermann, was once again his, almost. "Archie," he said in a tone carved from exasperated granite, "remove the dog." I stretched out comfortably on the rug. "Sure thing," first thing in the morning. Baron curled up at Wolfe's feet. Wolfe muttered one final word, "Pfui," and dinner was served. By 8 o'clock that evening, the brownstone had settled back into something resembling normalcy, if you count a day of murders, ribbons, confessions, and a Doberman union strike as normal. Fritz was in the dining room putting finishing touches on a veal roulade, fragrant enough to make a lesser man weep. Wolfe, having declared the case satisfactorily concluded, was back in his throne at the head of the table, looking as though he had personally dragged civilization out of the swamp and wanted everyone to remember who dried it off. I took my seat opposite him, stretching my legs. "So," I said, "are we going to talk about temperament classifications, or is dinner safe from academic commentary?" Wolfe set his napkin in his lap with ceremonial gravity. "Archie, it is imperative that you understand the distinction between temperament and behavior." I groaned. "There goes my appetite." Fritz entered with the first course, roasted artichoke hearts drizzled with lemon butter, and gave Wolfe a nod that would have made a monk feel chatty. Wolfe inhaled deeply. "As I was saying," he continued, "temperament is the inherent disposition. Behavior is expression. Confusing the two invites calamity. Like letting a Doberman redecorate your office, I asked. Wolfe glared. Phooey. One phooey already. We're off to a record start. He ignored me, which was his preferred method of losing an argument gracefully. Fritz returned with the veal roulade, sliced thick, layered with spinach and prosciutto, and flanked by Pommes Anna. Wolfe didn't speak again until he'd taken the first bite. He sighed. A benediction. Archie, he said, your timing earlier, bringing Miss Sloane's forged note to Inspector Kramer, was commendable. I nearly dropped my fork. Praise from Wolfe is a rarer commodity than a cab in the rain. Careful, I said. Too many compliments and I'll start believing you actually like me. Do not be absurd. So you're saying you don't? Archie. Yes. Eat. I did. The roulade was excellent, Fritz's work never being anything less. Wolfe spent the next few minutes lecturing on Parrell's temperament system, how the blue ribbon denoted defiance, the white timidity, the red aggression. I nodded and inserted enough wisecracks to balance the scholarly load without provoking an orchid-hour banishment. When we finished, Wolfe rang for coffee. Fritz appeared instantly, not calling from the kitchen, of course, and set down the pot with a formal little bow. Wolfe lifted his cup, studied me over the rim, and said, "Now recount the sequence." I leaned back. "All of it?" "All of it," he repeated. "Concise, Archie, not theatrical," I began. Galt discovers the ledger discrepancy. Rebecca Sloane panics. She steals the temperament ribbons and uses them as coded markers, one for each victim. Galt fights her, so she assigns him the blue ribbon, defiance. She kills him, plants the velvet scrap, and releases Baron, who ends up at Virginia's door carrying the bloodied piece. Wolfe lifted a finger. Correction. Baron was not released by Miss Sloane, but fled after witnessing Galt's death. "All right," I said. Baron initiates his solo career. Then Parrell tries to negotiate his way out of the mess. Rebecca gives him the white ribbon, timidity, and poisons his champagne at the gala. Less commentary. Sure. After that she moves on to Carter Van. He wouldn't stay quiet, so she marks him with the red ribbon. Aggression. She kills him neatly at 3:17 a.m., right on schedule. Wolfe nodded once. Continue. The diversion dog in the hallway throws me off the chase, but Van still manages a dying clue. Temperaments, not pedigrees. Which you, of course, deciphered before breakfast. Archie. Fine, fine. Then we held the brownstone showdown, Rebecca cracked, Kramer played nice, and the world is safe once again. Wolfe considered this summation. Acceptable, he said. That's practically a standing ovation from you. Archie. Yes? Drink your coffee. I did, savouring it. Fritz's brew could raise the dead or convince them to stay put. When we finished dinner and retired to the office, I found Baron curled up on Wolfe's rug like he'd paid rent. Wolfe scowled, but the dog didn't move. Archie, Wolfe said, settling behind his desk, remove him. Not a chance, I replied. He's still on duty, checking drawers. Wolfe let out a noise between a groan and a growl. He is not an employee. He found Galt's ledger page. By accident. He uncovered the planted note. By accident. He guarded your desk from sabotage. That, Wolfe said stiffly, is conjecture. Baron thumped his tail on the rug. I gave him a wink. We didn't have long to settle before the phone rang. I grabbed it. Nero Wolfe's residence. Archie Goodwin speaking. Wolf tamer, part-time dog interpreter. Kramer's voice was unmistakable. Goodwin, put him on. I handed Wolfe the receiver. Wolfe lifted it reluctantly as though it weighed 60 pounds. Yes, Inspector? Kramer's voice crackled through. Even from across the room I could hear the reluctance, stubborn and honest as bedrock. Wolfe, Sloane's given the full confession. Every detail matches your reconstruction. Wolfe nodded. I expected no less. And, Kramer added, you kept the department honest on this one. If Wolfe had been wearing a hat, it would have levitated. Your cooperation, Wolfe replied, was indispensable. They paused, two immovable forces acknowledging each other without blinking. Kramer cleared his throat. Anyway, that's all. Good night. Wolfe said, Good night, Inspector, with a tone bordering on humane. I almost applauded. When the call ended, Wolfe replaced the receiver with slow precision, then allowed himself the smallest possible exhale. "You know," I said, "if you two ever exchange Christmas cards, I want copies." "Archie." "Framed copies." "Archie." "Yes?" "Enough." He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, a rare gesture that meant the case had drained even his formidable reserves. Outside, the orchids were beginning their evening hour, filling the air with faint sweetness. Inside, the office felt like a room returning to its natural shape after being stretched by chaos. Virginia Galt arrived at 9 on the dot, wearing a navy coat and a quiet smile that hadn't visited her in days. She brought Baron's leash and a small envelope. "Mr. Wolfe," she said softly, "I believe this belongs to you." Wolfe opened the envelope. Inside lay a check generous enough to make a steel vault blush. His eyebrows rose, an event rare enough to deserve a parade. "You need not," he began. "I do," she said firmly. "You saved my brother's name and my life." Wolfe bowed his head slightly, a gesture polite enough to count as gratitude. "Thank you." She knelt beside Baron, who nuzzled her happily. "I'd like to keep him," she said. "He was my brother's and, well, he seems to have adopted Mr. Wolfe's desk permanently." I chuckled. "You're lucky. Wolfe only lets about 3 living things in the world occupy that space." Wolfe shot me a look. "Archie." Virginia smiled through tears. "Thank you both." She clipped Baron's leash, whispered something into his ear, and led him toward the door. He paused once, looked back at Wolfe, then followed her out without complaint. A good dog. Better detective. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the brownstones sighed with relief. Wolfe, however, sighed with something closer to liberation. "Well," I said, dropping into my chair, "that's that. Murder solved, ledger recovered, Kramer cordial, dog promoted, world restored." "Archie," Wolfe said, "do not romanticize." "I wouldn't dream of it." I leaned back and crossed my ankles on the footstool. The office looked strangely empty without Baron perched by the desk. The blotter was back in place, the ribbons sealed in police custody, and not a single stray paw print remained. But the air still held the faint echo of a Dobermann who'd temporarily become part of the Wolfe household, an accomplishment few humans could claim. Wolfe began sorting his note cards, humming under his breath. I tapped my pen and watched the room settle into its natural rhythm. "So," I said casually, "what do you think about getting a dog for the brownstone?" Wolfe froze. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his eyes. "No." "Come on, just a small one. Something that fits on your desk." "No." "A dachshund?" "No." "A collie?" "No." "Fine," I said. "What about a goldfish?" He glared. "Archie?" "Yes." "Phooey." And there it was, the final, exhausted, perfectly Wolfe ending to a week in which temperament beat pedigree, dogs beat killers, and the most immovable man in New York tolerated a Doberman on his desk. Later that night, I wandered back into the office alone. The desk lamp glowed warmly. The rug was still indented where Baron had slept. Outside, the city hummed, pretending it hadn't nearly collapsed under the weight of human folly. I sat, stretched, and let the quiet settle. Some men chase killers, some chase pedigrees. Me? I chase Wolfe's sanity, and between you and me, that Doberman came closer to breaking him than any murderer ever did.